According to Us podcast, where we slowly but surely figure out our way through life. I'm your host, Aaliyah, a self-proclaimed crisis expert, and you're listening to my opinions. So, where do we even start? You're a bit lost in life. What do you do now? And that is me asking myself. And I say, go back to the basics. We gotta just go back to the basics. And I'm sure, a lot of you guys will probably know values. You probably did all these value tests for career figuring out in grade 10 or trying to figure out your major, university, or whatever. It's always like, what are your values? And then build off of that. Blah, blah, blah. And then they never help you. So we're going to do that. Perfect. But for your life instead of your career. So that's fun. And hopefully this time, it will actually be helpful. So the first step to figuring out your life or what to do or what you want is figuring out what makes up a good and meaningful life in the first place. Because you can't live a meaningful life if you don't know what a meaningful life is. And there have been a lot of systems, charts, theories for well-being that we're going to go over. And then the next step to living a meaningful life, but not just a generic one, but the one that you actually feel aligned with, is knowing what your values are. So let's get into the pillars of well-being. We're going to start with a basic system that I feel like most of us are going to be familiar with, and that is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like a pyramid that represents a psychological theory which organizes human needs into a pyramid. So at the base of the pyramid, you have your physiological needs. Then the level above that is your safety needs. Level above that is love and belonging. Above that is esteem, and then self-actualization at the very top. I'm sure you've heard of it. If you haven't, Google it. Take a gander on Google and familiarize yourself. So the argument of this theory is that you kind of need to meet these needs in this hierarchical order. Basically, if your physiological needs are not met, then you're not going to focus on your love and belonging, or you're not going to focus on your safety needs. If your safety needs are not met, you're not going to be anywhere near self-actualization. However, as a lot of people have criticized, we know that needs are not a strict hierarchy and that they're also dynamic. That, sometimes even if you're starving, you want to be safe also. And that, in fact, self-actualization can often come from physiological needs not being met. I'm not saying that that's what, you should do for self-actualization. I'm just giving an example. Obviously, they're also a little bit hierarchical in the sense that, yes, if you're starving, you probably won't care as much about your love and belonging in the community. But these needs are also overlapping as well as hierarchical. Humans can be driven by multiple needs at once, even. And this system has also been criticized because of how Western-centric it is or how individualistic it is, in the sense that, it portrays self-actualization as the goal, the ultimate goal for everyone, even though there might not even be a quote-unquote goal in life at all. I don't think there is a goal in life. And, for, again, societies that are not so individualistic, the goal at the top of that pyramid might be helping the community the most, and self-actualization might not be in there at all. So people have moved away from this Maslow's hierarchy of needs and decided to come up with more of these pillars, these individual pillars of well-being. And there are tons of versions of them. Again, if you want to Google pillars of well-being, you will find that there are anywhere from 3 to 10, sometimes even more. And they include a bunch of different things. Like there's a mental pillar usually, or sometimes it's called a cognitive or an intellectual pillar. There's usually almost always a physical or a nutritional pillar of well-being, social pillar, financial pillar, spiritual pillar, environmental, emotional, occupational, and more. But on this podcast, we're going to narrow it down to 5 of these pillars: physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual. And why am I not including some of the other ones? Because, well, some of them, like for example, the occupational and the environmental, they can fall into the other pillars. For example, the occupational, for me, is very much related to your mental pillar of well-being and your fulfillment in that area. You know, if you're bored at your job or if you hate your job, if it's not mentally stimulating, or if it's the other way around, if it's completely burning you out, that's going to be a part of your mental pillar of well-being. Likewise, the environmental pillar, which I believe is of course very important. You know, clean water, clean environment is very important. But I do think it can be categorized as part of the physical pillar of well-being, in the sense that, you know, the environment we live in does affect our physical health. So I'm collapsing those into mental and physical pillars. The financial pillar I'm not going to include for 2 reasons. The first one is I don't believe that it's necessarily going to provide you any fulfillment or happiness. Of course, up to a point where you feel financially secure and you're not like stressed about it, of course. But the second reason is that I find it boring. So there you go. I don't want to talk about it. Okay, now that we've established the 5 pillars of well-being and why I'm including some but not others, let's define the 5 that we've picked out and why they are important and considered the base of well-being. Because if you don't think something is important, you're not going to prioritize it. So let's start with the physical pillar of well-being and why physical health is important. Well, physical health is important because life is much harder to live if you don't have the best physical health. And I'm not saying that you can't have a happy and fulfilled life if your physical health is suffering. Of course, there are people, but it is much more difficult to do it. And honestly, I applaud those people who can do it, who have chronic pain and who still manage to live a happy and fulfilling life. But I also know that any of them would tell you that they would love to have their health back. So, you know, if you're in okay physical health, first of all, let's be grateful. And second of all, let's make sure we take care of our bodies. You know, we only have one. So, and that's going to include, obviously, exercise, nutrition, sleep, environmental factors, yada, yada, yada. Now, the next pillar is going to be our mental pillar of well-being. And I classify these as mental pursuits, creativity, goal setting, learning, mental stimulation, things like that. And I believe that if you're bored or not challenged, you're not going to be very happy or fulfilled. And at the same time, if you're burnt out, you're also not going to be happy. So it's all a balance, you know? It's all a balance, folks. I'm sure you know that, though. Okay, the next one is emotional, and that one is also self-explanatory because if you are sad and depressy and angry, yeah, you're probably not happy. And again, I'm not saying that you can't be happy and fulfilled if you live with depression or anxiety or negative thoughts. I mean, those are unavoidable, but it's just a thing that we all have to keep working on, right? We all have to keep working on all of these pillars. In fact, actually, the work never stops. But life is better when you check in with yourself emotionally. This pillar is also going to be about self-awareness, empathy, again, like I mentioned, emotional regulation and resiliency, and all those things kind of help you get through life, really. And I just want to emphasize the main difference between the mental and emotional pillars. And the mental pillar, as I've just described, is more about thoughts, versus this one is more about feelings. So the social pillar is next, and that's going to include your relationships, family, friends, community. Why is this pillar important? Well, because if you're lonely, you're most likely unhappy. It's also important because community has been proven to majorly add to well-being. That's why a lot of studies show that religious people are much happier on average than non-religious people, because the big factor is not because they necessarily, believe in God or don't believe in God, but because of the community aspect of it, because they have someone or something to fall back on, whether that be family, your church community, your friends, yada, yada, yada. And the last pillar is going to be our spiritual pillar of well-being. And here I'm not necessarily talking about religion. Like I said, religion has proven to make humans feel more fulfilled and happy. But again, I don't think it's necessarily religion itself. I think it's the different aspects of religion, the different aspects that people combine in religion, like the spiritual aspect, the community aspect, the routine aspect, the hope aspect. So this pillar is not necessarily about religion. It's more just about the higher purpose and meaning and feeling, and that feeling of being a part of something bigger than you. It can include nature. It can include the universe. It includes things like wonder and awe that we feel when we look at the stars, or when we look at flowers, or the vastness of the ocean, and so on. And the reason that I decided to include this pillar is because of this concept of a God-shaped hole that was first popularized by a French philosopher named Blaise Pascal. So he argues that we as human beings are all born with this innate desire, with this innate longing for a quote-unquote God. And again, we all kind of know that feeling. Some people just call it higher purpose, meaning, but we all have this longing for it. And so however you decide to fill that hole, no pun intended, I think it's important to address in our overall picture of well-being. So that's why I included it. Now we're going to focus on these 5 pillars through the lens of our values. So, values in general are going to be very personal. There are obviously going to be some general ones that will apply to most people, but I implore you to really reflect and write them down. If it's difficult to think about what your values might be, or you don't even know where to start, or you feel like, maybe they're too generic and not personal enough, you can ask yourself, what are the top 3 to 5 qualities that I value in others? And again, those can be specific or those can be broad. But that kind of question tells you the kind of person you want to be, the kind of person you look up to. And then from there, to become the person that you want to be with these kind of qualities, you will need to live by a certain set of values in order to achieve that life and in order to become that kind of person. So from the top 3 to 5 qualities that you value in others, you can infer the things that you value in life. And maybe if you're like, I'm still lost, I don't know, I'm going to give you a list of my values, which are love, health, truth, curiosity, and beauty. And in a moment, I am going to expand on each one of them and again, explain why those are my values. Because again, I didn't just write those down and was like, yep, those are my values because I like how they sound. No, you do kind of have to figure out why you're writing certain values down, why you value these things. I categorized each value into the 5 pillars of well-being and basically how each one of these values is going to contribute to all 5 pillars of well-being. Some values can fall into just one category, some values can fall into more than one, but if you can, try and at least have one value correspond to each pillar of well-being for balance. Because we know we love balance. We love balance over here. Okay, why is my very first value love? Which, by the way, falls into the social, emotional, and the spiritual pillars of well-being. Well, I chose love because love is above pettiness. Love is respect. Love is selfless. I mean, love is pretty self-explanatory. And yes, love may be too vague and apply to too many pillars of well-being, but I know what it means to me. So, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. Yeah, and in my opinion, it's important because apathy makes life not worth living. And love, on the other hand, is passion and care, the opposite of apathy. I feel like it gives life more meaning. My second value is health, which I obviously corresponds to the physical pillar of well-being, and I feel like I already kind of explained as to why it's important to me, because you only have one body and one life to take care of your body. So, you get it. Basically, I think it would be very difficult to enjoy life in pain. My next value is truth or honesty, and that would correspond to the social or to the emotional pillars of well-being. Because I do think to be emotionally balanced and self-aware, you must be honest with yourself and with others. I think it is the thing that builds trust, and it would be very difficult to hold any kind of relationship without trust if there's no truth. Yeah. The fourth value is curiosity or learning, and that's going to correspond to our mental well-being pillar. I value curiosity and learning because it keeps me engaged and interested in life. It feeds the mind, if you will. And as I learn more, I can also adjust my values to improve my life. So I think it's very important. And last but not least, beauty. Beauty is my fifth value. Of course, I'm not talking about superficial beauty here. I'm not talking about, I value supermodels. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that deeper sense of beauty, beautiful art, whatever that means to you, again, that's all going to be extremely subjective. But also for me, a lot of the times it's nature, flowers, even little bugs and trees. It's more about that feeling of awe that beauty brings with it. It feeds my soul. It helps me be present. it's not productive, it's not efficient, beauty is not profitable. Okay, maybe it is very much profitable. We made it profitable. However, beauty in the sense that I'm talking about, it's not necessarily profitable. Its only purpose is to make the child inside you happy, which is very nice. A very nice sentiment, in my opinion. So that's why I value it. So yeah, those are my values. And of course, there are very many other popular values such as kindness, courage, confidence, accountability, loyalty, altruism, ambition, integrity. And all of these are pretty broad, but again, they're kind of supposed to be, because you should be able to apply these things to a lot of different life situations. Like, these are the things that guide you through life. And I advise that you avoid things like, I don't know, traveling, for example, where, you know, some people are like, oh yeah, my value is traveling. I'm like, okay, but is your value traveling? What is it about traveling that you value? Is it, you know, the different cultures that you value and their perspectives? So maybe your actual value is actually openness or open-mindedness or new experiences, adventure. You don't value the actual plane ride, right? So just make sure, again, that you are able to apply these values to a lot of different life situations. And then, for example, in the case of openness or adventure, that would be more like a mental value. You know, you can classify that as a pillar if you want to classify your values into the 5 pillars. And also, you know, it's okay if you don't have everything figured out all at once. I feel like if you're like, okay, I still don't know what the heck you're talking about, bro, and why are we even doing this? Yeah, that's chill. That makes sense. But I do think that going back to the basics is important in order to know what your motivations are. And if you know what your motivations are and what kind of life you want to live long term, which is another thing that you should consider when choosing your values, is that, you know, what kind of life do I want to live long term? Like right now, yeah, I might value fun and adventure or whatever, but like, what does that mean for me and my character long term? And I'm not saying those things are bad. I'm just saying that, like, if you want to have a fun and adventurous life, yeah, that should be your value. And to be fair, values will also change over time. You know, just because you wrote these ones down and classified them and thought about them doesn't mean you're not going to change your mind in 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, right? You don't have to, you know, box yourself in with these things and how your life, you want your life to turn out or to be. So yeah, try and remember that you don't have to have all your values figured out, that they are going to change as life progresses, that your priorities are going to change, and that you don't have to live according to these values right in this moment. Like, this is not an exercise to make you feel bad about yourselves. Like, it's not for you to write these things down and then realize that you're not living life according to these things at all, and now you're a failure. It's probably a good wake-up call for you to change a few things around, but please don't view this as an opportunity to shame yourself. And also remember that maybe you value a bunch of things in life. Maybe, like the example I brought up earlier, you know, you want a fun and adventurous life, but is it in the top 3 to 5? That's what you have to really think about. Is it in the top 3 to 5 most important things to you? Because as much as we'd like to think that we can have it all, we can't. So prioritize, okay? And it's going to be hard, but I believe in you. In conclusion, to live a life that feels good to you, you need to know what kind of life you'll want to live first. You need a bit of a North Star, aka your values. So, start asking yourself these questions earlier rather than later. I think it's good to equip yourself before, shit hits the fan. I think, if you're like, actually, my life is great and I don't want to change anything because right now life is amazing and I'm amazing and everything's great. And that's awesome. And I'm super duper happy for you. But at some point, the wheel will turn, the seasons will change, and you're going to have to do this anyway, I mean, I guess you don't have to figure out your life values, but I'm just saying it might be a good thing to check in with yourself about earlier rather than when you're 50, for example, hence the midlife crisis. When people find themselves all of a sudden on this train where they didn't even know that they were on. And all of a sudden they're like, what? I'm going in this direction and I've been going in this direction for so long. And that's fine, There's still time to get off. Still time to get off the train. And if you find yourself and you're like, I'm actually this, you check in with yourself and you're like, this is a great train and I love the destination, then good for you, man. That's what we like to hear, okay? I mean, can't relate. Okay, not that I can't relate. My life is pretty good. But I make it a point to do this every so often because, as I mentioned previously, our values change as we change. So I'd like to close this episode out with a little Michael Jackson, King of Pop lyric. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. It's a great song. You should go listen to it. Yeah, because I truly do think that making yourself better is doing everyone else around you and yourself a big favor. So, I don't have life figured out, but it's fun to share the parts that I think I do. So thank you for listening to According to Us. And now, go outside, touch some grass, get off your phone, and take care.